Welcome, Karen. Why is it that vertical development seems to be gaining traction?
The situation is changing. So in the past, we've had a relatively stable idea of what leadership is because people have been working in managerial hierarchies. In this rapidly changing, ambiguous, complex world that most people are working in, some people are thriving in that and some people aren't. And we can see that, but we don't know why. And I think vertical leadership gives people a language to understand what's going on in different people in response to that level of complexity. People have noticed that there's something absent in the way that we talk about leadership, and particularly about leadership development. Talk about the personal qualities of leaders. They don't necessarily help us to distinguish between somebody who is really able to show a capacity for leadership in a given role and somebody who is struggling to fulfill that role. So what vertical development is mainly about is the underlying capacities that the person is bringing to their work. Not just the leadership aspect of their work, but the managerial aspect, the strategizing aspect, the delivery aspect of their work. And it's not just about those personal qualities.
What's the difference between traits or qualities and a capacity?
So the way I describe a capacity is a potential to do things that may or may not be present in the person. So if we think about two people who are managing broadly similar portfolios at a broadly similar level in the organisation, we may look at those two people and say, this person is relatively near the ceiling of what they can cope with at this moment in their career. They haven't got capacity to expand from here. They might not have either the intellectual strengths yet or the interpersonal strengths, or particular aspects of themselves of self-understanding which allow them to go to the next stage. This other person, although they're at the same age, has got a lot of room left.
What's the research basis for vertical development?
So all of the vertical development theories, which are broadly given the umbrella of adult constructivist development theory, come out of the original work of Piaget, who looked at child development. And what Piaget recognised was that children go through very identifiable stages of development in the way they make sense of the world. Some of those stages are quite stable and sometimes they're in transition. So the adult constructivist development people say, and that carries on. That goes on right the way through adulthood. And hopefully, unless we get stopped at a particular stage, our way of making sense of the world becomes more complex, more nuanced, more able to manage lots of different aspects and perspectives at the same time.
In your approach, you seem to have brought together several different strands or theories, Jakes, Keegan, Cook-Reuter, Fonagy. Why these particular theories?
None of the vertical theories cover everything. So some emphasise the cognitive aspect more, some emphasise the psychological, intrapersonal aspect more, others emphasise ego development, which is a general term for all sorts of aspects, but doesn't really cover any of them in depth. And what we wanted to do was create a model that felt like it really covered all of the dimensions of a person in their work.
So what's unique about this approach?
Because vertical development has become quite trendy, a lot of people are rewriting the ego development models which came out of Jane Lovinger's work. So people are using different descriptors for fundamentally what is the same model. They all have this limitation of not emphasising, in my view, enough the cognitive aspect of development or the nuanced psychological aspects of development. They tell you what the result is, but they can't necessarily say very much about what the process of development is.
And what's the practical application of all of this?
Well, it's huge. I mean, it's that very pragmatic use of an idea which can be applied to pretty much any aspect of people development in an organisation, either pure leadership development or recruitment or assessment. Anything where we're thinking about, does this person fit this role? Is this person discharging their responsibilities in the most effective way possible? It's not a way of rewriting it and saying we need to be different sorts of managers and leaders. It's a way of diagnosing the particular fit between an individual and the role that they're either performing or they are wanted to perform, and what their development gaps are. Because we're not diagnosing very accurately where the specific cohorts of people or individuals are in their development, and therefore saying this is the particular thing that this person needs to develop at this point.
So you've mapped all these different development approaches that seem relevant to the stages of development. How have you gone about doing that?
What we've tried to do is go back again to these underlying capacities that I talked about originally, the cognitive, interpersonal and personal capacities that an individual has, and even more fine-grained, what's the specific intelligence that is developing at this point. So there's not just what develops within a stage, there's what starts to show up new as you move from one stage to another. If you then think about what capacity is that particular development activity trying to create, then you can map the two things across. But you have to go down to the underlying intent of the development asset and the underlying capacity that you're trying to work on and put those two things together.
So if I was trying to engage my chief executive with this concept, what would be the messages that I might be talking to him or her about?
One of the biggest problems that senior leaders in corporates talk about is the very great difficulty of attracting and retaining talented people. And what they mean by talented is high capacity, actually, in our language. People who've got plenty of room to keep stretching themselves and are going to keep moving in that way throughout their careers. And I think if senior leaders understood what they really meant by talent, and it did reflect this capacity, they would be able to identify better ways of recruiting people and holding on to them, which has an enormous effect on their ability, particularly to run good strategies and to respond to sudden changes in the organisational environment. Otherwise, organisations tend to rely on quite a small number of people who can work in that way, often less than 10% of the managerial population, to make all of those big decisions, to be able to respond quickly in situations which are changing fast. If we then look at the sort of smaller organisations in the newer industries, at one level the argument's even easier. You've got to have the majority of your people who are able to manage in different situations, be able to cope with uncertainty, be able to work their way through ambiguity to find a new way forward. If you can then identify and develop those capacities in people really from quite a young age, that gives you an enormous competitive advantage.
Thank you very much, Karen.